Welcome back to my little garden. We are now in February of 2020 and things are looking a little bit different out here. We actually have snow. I figured instead we would discuss some of the principles of winter and the benefits of snow and its impact on the garden. So some of the pros of snow in the winter is insulation. The snow actually helps to protect a lot of the plants that are in your garden by creating an insulating barrier between the wind and the severe temperature changes that tend to happen at the end of the winter. Oftentimes, the ground is frozen in the winter, and when we get a lot of rain, we get a lot of water runoff. So the ground in your garden is not able to retain the moisture that is falling, and it is a drought season despite there being so much precipitation coming from the sky. So when we have snow, it's a different impact because the snow can slowly leach back into the ground and put the moisture directly into the plants in a very trickle-like process as it melts towards the spring, as the ground is starting to thaw, instead of just having runoff everywhere. So in our place, I actually look forward to shoveling because it means that more snow is getting put onto the lawn and more snow is getting put onto the garden, more moisture there instead of just leaving it on the driveway and having the sun melt it off. More work for me, but in many ways, snow is also poor man's fertilizer. It is an excellent source of nitrogen, so it's like a slow release fertilizer from Mother Nature. So some of the garden tasks that we're going to be performing later on this month are going to be some winter sowing. We did a few of those last year and they worked out really, really well. I'll show you one of the plants. I ended up leaving it for winter forms over the course of the entire season and into the winter. And it was so easy and it was so successful, so we're definitely going to do even more of those this year. Pruning the blueberry bushes that are in the front barrel, we'll have to get those going. They're best to be done while it's still dormant, so that is an end of winter task. And for the Toronto region, Southern Ontario, end of winter typically falls into the end of February, beginning of March. I don't have any good examples of these plants here in my garden, but some things are actually already blooming in Southern Ontario, which is really exciting. There have been some reports of snowdrops, which is a little bulb already coming up. Over at the Toronto Botanical Gardens, there are some hellebores that have already put out their little their blooms, and the foliage is of course already green. So through the snow peeking out, you've got these little pops of color. And the Asian cultivar of witch hazel, Arnold's Promise, is also in bloom in some people's gardens already. So despite it being so gray and despite it being cold and frozen and dormant, there are actually plants in Ontario that will bloom at this time of year. Typically they're going to be blooming closer to March, but because it's been such a mild year this year, we're getting a little bit of a kickstart to that. The Farmer's Almanac is an excellent resource, especially if you're trying to find your frost dates, other garden tasks. We'll wait for this guy. For Toronto, our last frost date here is the first week of May, so around May 4th. A lot of people in my experience still don't tend to plant a lot of things out until the end of May, the May 2-4 weekend. But this year, because it has been so mild, part of the perks of that is that the season does tend to warm up a little bit faster. If it's a really cold year, things tend to take a little bit longer to get going. But because it has been so mild, the almanac is calling for a warmer than average April and May. Wet, but a little bit warmer, so things should be able to get a nice kickstart going with all of the blooms. Or last year, things were a little cool. It was very wet last year, and it had a little bit of a slower start. Things were actually quite late to get going. So fingers crossed that this year we have things blooming more or less when they would normally be, if not maybe even a little bit earlier, and we get to see some signs of spring sooner. So I'll take you for a quick little wander around, show you some of the plants that are going to be dealt with this coming week, and some of the results of the winter sowing from last year. So last month we were looking at all of the new growth and some of the buds that were putting out forms. And since then, it looks, either I miscounted or it looks like we've actually gained another 2 buds on here. And now, in addition to the flower buds, the leaf buds are starting to form as well. And what's really nice about leaving the structure behind and having the seed heads form, is you get a lot of this really pretty form work in the garden instead of it just being a big flat graveyard. It's our attempt at making a snowman. So these are our blueberries in a barrel, and blueberries do really well in cold hardy climates. It's still questionable whether they're going to do well in an exposed above grade situation like this, but it looks like it's done well. It could also be because it's been such a mild year, but you want to prune blueberries when they're still dormant. So you have new growth here, which you can see has a really nice new fresh color, and then older growth which ends up having a more woody bark-like texture. So what I'm going to end up doing in the next week or two is chopping out some of the older growth ones, and that will rejuvenate the plant, encourage it to bear more fruit, and send up newer shoots. And typically you're going to have more fruit producing on newer shoots rather than older shoots. Same thing with this other variety back here. The main stem on that plant is quite old and woody. Two that will probably be chopped out. We've got this big one here, and then this one over here, and then we'll leave a bunch of the newer growth in to bear more fruit. It's always bittersweet when you're pruning and chopping things out. Not much is going to be touched over here. Most of these plants require pruning after they bloom, even though they are also shrubs. So the lilac, for instance, that would be pruned after blooming, as with the mock orange and the purple leaf sand cherry. So nothing in here is going to be touched in the next few weeks. Same thing with these. The rose will end up pruning back before it starts to leaf out in the spring, but we're going to leave it alone. Clematises, pruning depends on what type of clematis it is. And over in here, this was one of our great successes of winter sowing last year. So I put him out in seeds in like an orange juice container at the end of February, beginning of March, and just left it, and it fed us all season long. The Swiss chard that I have out in that section out there was originally planted along here, and I had just transplanted it for some color leading up to the rest of the year, and that was also a winter sow. So we're going to do a bunch more of that this year and try and add in a few more varieties, do a few more flowers and things. So beyond pruning and starting winter sowing, now is a really great time, if you didn't do it in January, to plan the garden for the coming year. If you are new to your space, I would highly recommend sitting back and observing, starting now, figuring out, what does my garden lack? Is it just a lawn that is boring in the winter time? Does it need more shape? Does it need more color? Like, what do I feel is lacking? When I'm sitting inside, what am I looking at? Or what do I want to not be looking at? What can I plant to hide certain elements that are unsightly? And being cognizant of the different seasons and leafy plants versus coniferous evergreens. It's a good time to start observing your garden space. Also observing, where does the water pool as things start to thaw in the next few weeks? Do I have any ponding issues? Are there any drainage issues? Is it getting into my basement? Do I need to possibly regrade, put in rain gardens, redirect the water, capture the water in different ways? The water is going to become a very prominent topic in the next few weeks as things start to thaw and change. So being observant of microclimates within your garden space. So looking out behind me, we tend to have a lot of snow that will accumulate. But just over to my left here, we have a fairly large canopy that comes out over top of the house, and we don't get a lot of accumulation up against the foundation of the house. It's very much a dry zone because of that, and that's good from an architectural point of view because you're not going to get the same sort of water issues within your house, but it does pose problems for plantings because it is a very dry, very barren area. So taking note of things like that. You also have a lot of heat that will radiate off the brick, so the temperature of this area over here is a lot warmer because it has all the morning sun accumulating in the brick and then radiating back out throughout the day, plus less moisture. So the sort of plants that will do well here are going to be very different than the plants that are going to be doing well over here. So being mindful of that and taking notes as each season progresses is very important to do if you want to be planting your own garden. So this is what I mean with, I say we have microclimates within the garden space. You can see at the foundation of the house there is quite a large overhang that prevents the water from getting there, and then also the heat that is radiating off of the house causes it to be a dry zone. If you have any construction projects that you want to be doing, now is also the time to really start planning for those. Planning ahead now will have you prepared for the beginning of the spring to really hit the ground running as soon as things are thawed. Your contractors can come in, or you can come in and do it yourself and really hit the ground running and get the projects that you need done so that you can enjoy them throughout the rest of the season. It's also the time to take note of your vegetable garden plans, as we're still a little bit early for starting seeds. Plants are going to really get leggy if you start them now. Onions are the exception. Onions take an extremely long time from seed to grow, but tomatoes and peppers are still about 2 or so weeks away before we'd really start them. Taking stock of what seeds you have, what seeds you need. There are a lot of Seedy Saturday events happening all throughout the city. If you just do a quick Google, you're bound to find something in your neighborhood, and it's a great opportunity to seed swap local heirloom, open pollinated vegetables, flowers, native plants as well, to then incorporate into your garden. And it's just in time for a seed starting process within your own homes. For winter sowing, typically you're going to focus on cold hardy crops. So that is things like arugula, parsley, kale, pansies, different things like that, where seed starting indoors is typically going to be your heat-loving plants like your tomatoes and your peppers. And then there are other fast-growing seeds that you can just direct sow later on in April, such as peas. Typically when you're pruning fruit trees, you want to do it when they are still dormant. And to tell if a plant is still dormant, my rule of thumb is using maple syrup festivals as a guiding principle. Once the sap starts flowing, the tree is starting to come back into its own, and you're starting to get a little bit late for pruning. Maple syrup festivals typically start around March break, which is about mid-March, and go until the end of March. So to get your pruning done before the middle of March is ideal. So I hope you enjoyed our tour of our February garden space in Toronto, Canada. It is definitely white, it's cold. It may not be as exciting as California or UK gardens are this time of year, but this is what we have to deal with. These are the tasks that we need to be tackling this time of year, and some of the planning suggestions in order to make the best of the coming year. So hope to see you again next month when we do our March garden tour, and stay tuned for more stay tuned for more tips and tricks in the coming weeks for things like winter sowing and pruning, and we'll see you then. Thanks. Oh, we got a snow angel. I hope you guys enjoyed this little garden tour of our February space.